So how about we talk about line number 3, which is that love is affirming everything I feel. And this, sometimes when you write these out, they sound ridiculous.
Yes.
Right? But that's because they are ridiculous, but nobody ever says it that way. The lie is absorbed. The lie is, you get the packaging of the lie. You never open it to think about what the thing is you're really believing. And that's what you're doing. You're saying, hey, let's open this and look at it. So what is this? Love is affirming everything I feel. What is that?
Yes. And you're right. It's never stated that way. It's just assumed. We hear these things in culture like love is love. Like if you loved me, you would do X, or if you loved me, you wouldn't do X. And this is really deceptive because we as Christians are called to be loving. We are called to love because God himself is love. And so our kids are receiving this message just like we are, that if we are loving, we will never make someone feel uncomfortable. We'll never make someone feel like they are not enough. And so this is really dangerous because the word love is being completely redefined, like so many different words in our culture. Just, we might be talking with someone using the same vocabulary, but be talking about two completely different concepts. Because if we think of, biblically what love is, we know in Greek, there's multiple words used to describe what we just use in English, one word, love. But if we think about that highest form of love, like the love that God has, among the members of the Trinity, the love that God has for us, it's this self-sacrificing, this thinking of another's best interest and putting that above your own, where our culture has really shifted that, to say that love is a feeling, love is how I feel when everything is okay. And so if our kids if we're not careful with training our kids to actually think through what a word means, then they're going to so easily buy into this, because the narrative in our culture is that if you tell anyone that what they're doing is wrong, or if you don't celebrate what they're doing, that might actually go against reality, as the way God has designed it, then you know what, you are not loving. So what's really important for us to do here is to really get our kids to ask good questions and to pay attention to how words are used. That this is something we're going to need to do some direct training of. We need to directly ask them, what is the definition of love? Let's actually look at this. And then look at, okay, how are some people defining love nowadays? This is in some of the materials I've created. We take 2 whole days just to talk through words with kids, because it's really beneficial to look at definitions and then also look at examples.
This
and
one's
look
huge.
at, okay, when somebody's...
Yeah. This one's huge. This is such a big deal, the whole love question, because it's again, this is not something just kids are dealing with and, oh, parents, you're all immune to it. I'm like, probably many of you are going, I think I've swallowed that one too. Like, what are some of the spheres where this will impact us when we come to a decision and we make a wrong choice because we think love is affirming everything I feel? Could you give maybe a couple examples of like real life scenarios?
Yeah. So when, just with everything that's going on with gender and sexuality, so many parents that I talk to, even unfortunately now in the elementary grades, they're having their child is going to school with someone who last year was a boy and is now identifying as a girl, or last year was a girl and is now identifying as a boy. And they're expected, just without any question, to really celebrate that and, to call that student by his or her preferred pronouns. And so, the narrative then is, well, if you actually don't believe that he's a boy, or if you don't actually believe that she's a girl, then you're not loving him or her. And so this is when with our kids, we can go to the definitions of words, but then also anchor this back to the first thing that we talked about, the difference between objective truths and subjective preferences. And to talk through, okay, like objectively, who is this child? That they were born a boy, they are a boy. Is it the most loving thing for us to do to tell a lie and to affirm his subjective feelings or her subjective feelings? Now, this can get wildly complicated, and sometimes it involves actually looking at, is this school, this classroom, the best place for our child to be, because they might be too young, to on a daily basis walk through this. But just practically, knowing that our kids are going to encounter this, whether it's at school, whether it's in our own families, our own extended families, but to actually think through, like, is this loving? Is this actually what love is? And I love, in the example in Mark 10, where the rich young ruler comes to Jesus, and he tells him, that he's followed all the commandments. And it says that, Jesus looked at him and loved him and told him, this one thing you lack. And he knew that it was the one thing that rich young ruler needed, but also the one thing that rich young ruler was not going to decide to do. And it says Jesus loved him. That is how Jesus loved him. And that's a really powerful example to give to our kids. Especially with this lie that we're facing in culture.
Yeah. And I think that I almost want to empower people, even kids, by saying, if someone says you're not loving them, that doesn't mean you're not loving them.
Exactly.
And parents need to hear this too when their kids tell them, like, you hate me, and that's that's like the trump card, because you won't let me do the thing I want to do. You hate me, therefore. And the wise parent, the secure parent, the one who understands their worldview, can look and say, no, you're just upset because you're not getting what you want. And there's an element of that we need to look at all of our culture and say, yeah, the affirming everything thing is silly and strange and irrational. It doesn't make sense of objective truth. And it's also one-sided, because we're really not affirming everything you feel. We're only affirming things you feel that are in a certain accepted cultural category, right? So I feel that male and female are real, that apply to almost everybody as male or female. Those are real, like, objective physical things. And people are going to say, well, we're not going to affirm what Mike feels right there. Forget that. We're not affirming him at all. So you find that it's a super inconsistent. That's why it's never presented as a clear doctrine believed by people. Instead, it's just, it's more presented as like a standard of behavior. Approval if you submit to this standard of behavior, disapproval if you don't. Yeah.
Right. And that's another really powerful thing that we can do, is train our kids to constantly be asking questions, to be asking, what do you mean by that? Why do you believe that's true? Or can you explain more about this to me? Because a lot of times what they'll face somebody wanting them to justify their beliefs. And there are justifications for those, we need to train our kids for that. But a lot of times, these words are just thrown out, like, you're not loving, or, like, you're not doing the loving thing. And it's like, well, what do you mean by love? Like, several years ago, I was in downtown Chicago, and, like a gay rights activist was like handing out pamphlets, and, I engaged with him, and he was like, do you believe in equal rights? And I was like, well, that's such an interesting question. Can you tell me what you mean by equal rights? Because, if I had said that I wasn't in favor of homosexual marriage, like, he would have said, well, you don't believe in equal rights. And it's like, well, I do believe in equal rights, but I don't believe that that's part of the natural order. I don't believe that's part of God's design. So if we can train our kids to ask questions, there could actually be meaningful discussions, usually not, but sometimes there could be. But also for them to be able to see, like, oh, it's not me that's not being unloving. It's this idea that's being supported is unsupported. It's irrational.
Right. Yeah. Then hopefully they have the power to look at the people and be like, oh, you're mad at me, but you're wrong. That's very empowering in a positive way, like, you're mad, but you're also wrong. So